Marlene Daniels paid for her first-class seat in full. However, when she was discreetly requested to move to the rear of the aircraft, she did not cause a disturbance. The remaining passengers did, and social media quickly followed suit. Marlene Daniels was not a woman who desired much. She had never been. This was true when she dedicated 32 years to Birmingham public schools and remained true when she raised 3 children on a teacher's salary following her husband's passing. She was reliable. She was resilient. At the age of 72, she had finally learned to do something she'd often advised others to do: take up space. This was the reason she purchased the ticket. Her granddaughter, Alia, was graduating from Purdue University in West Lafayette, Indiana. Alia was the first in the family to earn a degree in environmental engineering. It was a significant occasion, and Marlene, she planned to attend, positioned prominently, dressed in her best Sunday clothes, and cheering as she once did at those high school basketball games. She had flown previously, certainly, but always in coach. Always quiet. Always practical. This time, however, she reserved a first-class seat. She paid in full. She selected her spot by the window. It wasn't about luxury. It was about presence. It was her way of stating, "I'm still here. I'm present." Walking through the gate at Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, she appeared like someone who knew who she was. She wore gray slacks, a pearl gray sweater, small gold earrings, and a leather handbag that bore the marks of years of careful use. Her hair, silver and neatly arranged, was styled in a low twist. A smile touched her lips as she greeted the gate agent. A smile offered not from obligation, but from a genuine desire to be considerate, even when faced with unkindness. "Good morning, Miss Daniels," the agent said, scanning her ticket. She appreciated the formality. "Miss Daniels." It still carried a certain dignity. As she entered the plane, several passengers in the front cabin briefly looked up. A few offered smiles. A man, appearing to be in his 40s, gave a courteous nod. Seated across the aisle, a younger woman wearing a denim jacket and chunky boots was reading a magazine. Marlene located her seat, 2A, and made herself comfortable. She carefully placed her bag beneath the seat in front of her, adjusted her sweater, and gazed out the window. The sky was clear. That felt like a positive omen. Flight attendants moved along the aisle, arranging luggage and engaging in brief conversations. One offered her a water bottle. "First time in first class?" she asked, her smile seeming practiced. Marlene quietly laughed. "Is it that noticeable?" She responded. "You look wonderful," the attendant continued. "Just wanted to say welcome." Marlene nodded graciously and redirected her gaze toward the window, her thoughts drifting to Alia's smile and the swift passage of time. It felt like only yesterday she had been in the front office of Jefferson Middle, observing her granddaughter twirling in her chair while completing paperwork. She relaxed, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Everything appeared tranquil, orderly, and correct. Then a voice broke the stillness. "Excuse me, ma'am," a flight attendant stated, differing from the initial attendant. The attendant was young, blonde, with an expression that was difficult to interpret. Marlene looked up. "I'm so sorry, but there appears to have been a seat assignment mix-up. Please move to seat 19C. Marlene blinked, seeming to question if she's understood correctly. "I'm sorry, could you repeat that?" she asked. "There's been a change. A late passenger arrived. The system assigned you to this seat in error. We require this seat to be free." Marlene remained perfectly still. Her voice remained even, and her eyes didn't show any displeasure. She reached into a bag, retrieved the paper boarding pass she always printed, and displayed it. "This is my assigned seat, 2A. It was paid for and chosen by me." The attendant looked at it, then checked the aisle. "I understand. I truly do, but we're aiming to resolve this swiftly before takeoff." The woman in the denim jacket, seated across the aisle, lowered her magazine. She observed her sitting there prior to anyone else boarding. She stated softly. Marlene remained still. "Not yet." Her fingers rested on the chair arms, applying just enough pressure to keep her steady. "I'm not attempting to cause disruption," she said calmly, "but I reserved this seat months ago." The attendant leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. Ma'am, if you could please cooperate, we'll get this sorted. We just need you to move for now. Then, without another word, a man appeared. Tall, white, neatly trimmed beard, dressed in business casual, holding a laptop bag, and looking impatient. The attendant gave a small, practiced smile. Right this way, sir. But Marlene hadn't moved. Not yet. Marlene's fingers remained curled tight around the armrests. She detected the subtle sounds of passengers arranging themselves, zippers fastening, and safety belts securing. Yet, the atmosphere surrounding her felt heavy, resistant to movement. The man now stood almost directly in front of her seat, looking down with an expression that was a blend of confusion and annoyance. This is two-way, right? He asked, looking towards the flight attendant, but not Marlene. Yes, sir, she replied. Just a minor misunderstanding. We are resolving it now. Marlene spoke with composure, but her voice conveyed firmness. How is this addressed? The attendant attempted to maintain a pleasant demeanor. We simply require you to take seat 19C. It remains a satisfactory seat, and we will ensure you receive compensation for the disruption. Disruption? Marlene lifted her eyebrows. Being asked to vacate the seat I paid for in front of a completely full plane after I'd already been seated? That is not a small matter. The man finally made eye contact with her. He did not speak, just gazed. And something about that silence, easy for him, unsettling for her, felt significant. Ma'am, the flight attendant repeated, her voice now more assertive. Please. Marlene glanced around. Silence filled the cabin, but eyes were fixed on her. The man seated across the aisle appeared uneasy, fidgeting in his seat. The younger woman with the magazine continued to stare. She didn't desire to create a disturbance. It had never been her way. She had always instructed her students to overcome embarrassment with grace, not noise. At this point, she questioned what she would be conveying if she were to leave unnoticed. However, her dignity couldn't sustain the entire journey. Marlene carefully released her seatbelt, retrieved her bag, and rose. The flight attendant sighed, clearly relieved. Thank you, she stated, and moved to allow the man to take the seat, where he opened his laptop and straightened his tie as if it were a routine occurrence. Marlene held her back straight as she walked along the narrow aisle, passing rows of strangers who didn't meet her gaze. She arrived at row 19, located seat C, and put her bag under the seat without a word. The chair was smaller, situated nearer the restroom, noisy, confined, and not at all what she had anticipated. She settled in quietly, feeling a stinging in her eyes. A man seated across the row, a teenager wearing headphones, looked at her with a questioning expression. She gave him a weary smile. A weight settled in her chest, not from the seat itself, but from the lack of surprise. She had hoped, perhaps naively, that circumstances had changed. That at her age, following her considerable contributions to others, she wouldn't need to demonstrate her right to what she had purchased. She glanced down at her hands, noticing a slight tremor. Her wedding band remained on her finger, even after so many years. She had raised 3 children, 2 of whom were now professionals. She had dedicated her life to her students, writing letters to parents, staying late to tutor. She had broken up fights, buried students lost too soon, taught kids how to believe in themselves even when the world didn't. But here, on this plane, she was just someone to be moved out of the way. The captain came over the speaker, giving the usual welcome. Flight time to Indianapolis, 1 hour and 42 minutes. Seat backs upright, tray tables locked. Marlene leaned her head against the window. She remained silent, her gaze fixed. Then, a subtle change occurred. Excuse me? The voice came from the woman wearing a denim jacket, who had now risen to her feet. Hello, she said, her tone clear enough for Rose to hear. What transpired here doesn't feel right. Marlene turned, visibly surprised. The woman continued, gesturing towards the front. That lady had her seat initially. I observed her checking in and taking her assigned seat. She presented a printed boarding pass. And you all moved her? What was the reason for that? A moment of silence followed. Several passengers glanced upward, seemingly attentive. A flight attendant hurried over, attempting to soothe the woman. I understand your concern, but we're trying to keep things moving, she said. No, the woman responded, her voice rising. You moved her because you believed she wouldn't speak out. But I will, and she wasn't alone anymore. The cabin, which had just moments before been filled with the quiet rustle of carry-ons and pre-flight conversation, was now utterly silent. Marlene remained still. She remained in 19C, uncertain whether to feel embarrassed or thankful. Perhaps both. She observed the woman, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with a confident posture and eyes filled with frustration, firmly holding her position. I'm sorry, the woman continued, now speaking to everyone nearby. But you can't ignore what just occurred. You moved that woman from her purchased seat, offering no reason. And this man, she indicated towards two, simply walked in as if everything was normal. The gentleman in the seat glanced up briefly, adjusting his cufflinks. He remained silent. Why? The woman insisted. And I want the rest of the plane to hear, because this isn't correct. The flight attendant paused. She began to speak, but then glanced around. Passengers were turning to look. Phones appeared. A red-haired teenager, 2 rows back, had his camera aimed directly forward, recording openly. A mother with a toddler leaned in and whispered to her husband. People's gazes were moving. Tension increased. Suddenly, a voice from row 3 interrupted. She is correct. A man, appearing to be in his late 40s, with a beard streaked with gray and wearing a worn Detroit Tigers cap, rose partially from his seat. I observed it as well. She was already present, holding a boarding pass. You moved her without justification, and honestly, I am not satisfied with that. The flight crew exchanged looks. Another attendant, taller, older, possibly more experienced, approached, placing a hand lightly on the younger woman's arm. We will be able to discuss this once we are airborne, he stated. The woman in denim remained still. No, you speak now. This was not an accident. This was a deliberate action. And if no one else is going to voice it, I will. That woman was repositioned because you believed she wouldn't object due to her age. And let's be frank, because she is black. That word resonated like a sharp rebuke in the quiet. Marlene averted her eyes. She felt a flush rise up her neck. She had never enjoyed being the focus of attention. A voice arose from the rear of the cabin. That's unfair, a younger man murmured. There's no way that should have occurred. Another person then spoke, their voice raised. Return her seat. The man wearing a two-way radio seemed uneasy and finally closed his laptop. He glanced at the flight crew. Honestly, I don't need the seat if it's going to cause a disturbance, he stated. I simply took the one they assigned to me. The assertive woman responded with a derisive laugh. You observed her relocation and didn't inquire, not even once. He shrugged, deliberately avoiding eye contact. It's not my responsibility. The flight attendant tried to manage the situation. We recognize emotions are intense. Let's resolve this promptly so we can depart on time. However, the man wearing the tiger's cap interrupted. Not until she receives her seat back. He turned and addressed Marlene. Ma'am, he said, would you like your seat back? She paused. She had dedicated much of her life to instructing others on how to utilize their voice to champion what is just. Now her own trembled. I don't want to be the cause of this flight being delayed, she stated quietly. You are not, the woman from row 2 responded. You are the reason it might finally be rectified. That was when it occurred. The man in row 4 rose, followed by a couple situated behind him. If she doesn't receive her seat, someone declared, we are not sitting either. Flight attendants began to panic. Someone reached for the phone to contact the pilot. The aircraft doors remained open, and established procedures were now being implemented. The chief flight attendant returned, visibly agitated. We need to halt boarding, a fellow passenger interjected. It's too late. The planes are full. Resolve this immediately. Marlene rose deliberately. Her hands were steady now. I didn't request this situation, she stated. However, I will not remain here and pretend I didn't receive what I paid for. I secured seat 2A. I checked in promptly. I adhered to every guideline. Throughout my life, I've adhered to every guideline. Then, suddenly, the man in 2A rose. He offered no apology. He avoided eye contact. He simply took his laptop and proceeded toward the rear of the plane. The crew swiftly assisted Marlene in returning to the front. As she passed, numerous passengers acknowledged her with nods. Several offered words of encouragement. Good for you. You didn't deserve that. We saw. She resumed her seat in 2A. The armrests felt altered this time. Not stiff, not cold. By the time the plane departed, the video had already been uploaded online. As the aircraft ascended through the clouds, the mood within the cabin remained subdued. Marlene was seated in 2A, her hands calmly resting in her lap. She had not consumed the offered beverage. It wasn't necessary. Her mind was occupied. She felt no anger, not a vocal expression of it. She was considering her granddaughter, reflecting on the world Alia was entering with that degree. This incident, this small public humiliation, wasn't unprecedented. However, something about it felt different this time. In row 18, a teenager with red hair had already posted a 23-second video to TikTok with a caption, "They move an old black woman out of her first-class seat for some dude." The entire plane seemed to agree. The reactions were immediate. That's disgusting. She deserves to have that seat back. What's the airline? Tag them. By the time the flight landed in Indiana, 3 influencers had compiled a video that was distributed by an account called Justice from the Aisle, and it had already surpassed 80,000 views. Marlene was unaware of any of this. She was still arranging her sweater and getting ready to text Alia upon arriving at the terminal. Her phone had remained turned off throughout the flight. As passengers exited the aircraft, several briefly touched her arm. "You're a class act," they said. "Glad they made it right." She softly expressed her gratitude, her eyes appearing warm yet weary. She felt unsure how to react to the focus. A portion of her longed to retreat into the airport bustle, simply taking her shuttle and heading into town. However, upon activating her phone, it vibrated, and vibrated again. Numerous messages arrived, some from her children, others from past colleagues, and even a few unfamiliar numbers. Her youngest son, Louis, had attempted to call her 3 times. She accepted the call on the 4th ring. "Mama," he said, his voice already filled with emotion. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, baby." "Why? You're all over the internet. I mean everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. Someone has a video of you standing up for yourself. You handled that with grace, Mama. I'm proud of you." Marlene's chest tightened. I didn't even know she was filming. She captured everything. They attempted to displace you from a seat you paid for, and people are reacting strongly. She paused, taking a deep breath. "I didn't do anything extraordinary." "Yes, you did," Louis stated. By the time she reached the parking area where her shuttle was waiting, she had missed 5 additional calls. One was from a local reporter in Indiana. 2 were from media outlets she didn't recognize. Someone named Mia from the Morning Circle had emailed her twice already. Marlene lowered her phone into her lap, allowing the shuttle to rock slightly as it pulled away from the curb. A college-aged black woman with thick braids and a Purdue hoodie sat beside her. She looked at Marlene, paused briefly, then shifted in her seat. "Excuse me, ma'am," she began hesitantly. "Were you the woman on the plane today? The one in the video?" Marlene raised her eyebrows. "That fast?" The girl smiled. "People share things that are important, and this was important." Marlene paused. "It's odd. I didn't intend to be involved in something like this." The girl spoke softly, saying it hadn't been planned. However, she acknowledged that Marlene had managed the situation in a manner that resonated with many. Marlene returned a smile, then glanced out the window, observing the passing billboards and highway signs. She had simply intended to attend a graduation, and now the entire country was discussing the event. However, the airline remained silent, an unsettling silence. By the time Marlene arrived at her hotel in Lafayette, her name was already appearing in the subject lines of press releases. Unofficially, naturally, no company was willing to acknowledge anything that could incur a financial cost. However, the airline, Coastal Air, was aware of the situation. They had viewed the videos, read the online discussions, and hastily convened in private meetings. Marlene's phone rang again as she entered the elevator. An unfamiliar number. She allowed it to proceed to voicemail. She felt weary. She had traveled across 2 states, experienced humiliation, then received applause, and subsequently been drawn into a situation she hadn't requested. All she wanted now was a warm shower, a meal she didn't have to cook, and to see Ollie across that stage. Her room overlooked a small park where families walked dogs and students tossed frisbees. The sun was dipping behind the trees. Marlene watched for a moment before sitting down and turning on the TV. Local news was already on. The video, now exceeding 2.3 million views in under 12 hours, depicts what seems to be an elderly black woman being requested to relocate from her designated seat in the first-class cabin to make room for a younger white passenger. Other passengers on board stepped in, and the woman was ultimately returned to her original seat. She silenced the notification. Her phone vibrated again, a text from Lewis. Coastal Air has released a statement. It's underwhelming. She clicked the link. The official statement read, "We are aware of the incident on board Flight 482 today involving a seat assignment confusion. Coastal Air is committed to fair and inclusive treatment for all passengers and is reviewing internal procedures. We apologize for any inconvenience experienced." Inconvenience, she whispered, shaking her head. That word again. She remembered all the time she'd written real apologies in her career, when a teacher lost their temper, when a parent was left unheard. She avoided using that term, especially after incidents occurred. That evening, she accepted a phone call. Marlene Daniels? The voice was distinct and resolute. It belonged to a woman, professional in tone. Yes, speaking. This was Nina Morgan. I'm a producer with Midday Matters. We're interested in having you on our show tomorrow morning, just to briefly discuss your experience. It won't be intrusive. You're seen as representing something larger, and people are paying attention. Marlene hesitated. I'm not a symbol, she replied. I know, Nina responded, her voice gentle and sincere. That's why her refusal of the interview felt significant, at least for the time being. A quiet impulse arose within her. She had dedicated her life to assisting others in expressing themselves. Perhaps now was her opportunity to speak out once more. The following morning, she composed a handwritten note. It was brief, a single page in length, but each word was carefully chosen. She began with the sentence, I wasn't trying to go viral. I attempted to see my granddaughter. She spoke about dignity, about how simple it is to overlook older individuals, about what it feels like to be marginalized, not for the first time, but for the thousandth. And she concluded with this. I spent decades telling young people they were important, that their presence was important, that they belonged. I still believe that. But sometimes the ones who forget are not the students. It's the people who think they're in charge. She entrusted the letter to Lewis, who shared it on his social media with her consent. Within hours, by lunchtime, it had accumulated over 400,000 shares. Her story appeared on talk shows. An op-ed piece in the Indianapolis Journal commended her composure. Civil rights advocates incorporated her letter into speeches and public events. A particular comment resonated with her. It originated from a woman named Danielle in Topeka. My mother experienced a time when she was pushed out of a bank queue and dismissed it with a laugh. She stated, people like us don't make noise. I wish she could have witnessed this. Ms. Daniels, thank you. Your words helped me remember not to dismiss things so easily. Marlene was seated near the window, holding her phone and a letter. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't protested. She hadn't created a video. She simply stated the facts. However, the crucial moment she awaited hadn't arrived. It was pending on a campus stage. Saturday morning dawned clear and cool. Marlene hadn't slept well. Amidst the news reports, the communications, and the sensation of being observed by countless unseen individuals, finding peace had been challenging. Yet, her steps were firm as she entered the campus of Purdue University, her focus resolute. She wore a navy blue dress and a coordinating hat, the very one she'd reserved for a significant occasion. This was that occasion. She was unconcerned if people recognized her now. Let them. Today was not about her. She was there to witness her granddaughter's walk. The stadium seating was almost completely full when she located her row. A security guard approached her, held her gaze for a moment, then smiled. Ms. Daniels, yes? He said, I just wanted to say thank you. I saw the video. I'm glad you stood your ground. She nodded warmly. Appreciate that. I'm here for my granddaughter. He reached into his pocket and continued. The dean of students asked me to escort you to a reserved section. For family. It has a better view. Marlene paused, questioning, reserved for whom? He smiled. For you. She followed him upwards to the front rows, just behind the stage, where a simple seat was designated with a folded card. Mrs. Marlene Daniels, guest of honor. She blinked, her heart skipping a beat. It wasn't a spotlight. There was no podium, just a seat, and it belonged to her. Offered, not taken. Shortly, the ceremony commenced. Names were announced. Gowns flowed. Applause resounded. Then, Alia Denise Daniels. The name resonated through the air like a church bell. Marlene watched as her granddaughter advanced. Tall, radiant, her eyes gleaming under the weight of her own accomplishment. She saw her grandmother, and for a split second that proud smile wavered, only to return, fuller, brighter, and glistening with tears. Following the ceremony, the family assembled beneath a cluster of trees near the quad. Her sons were already debating who was taking whom to dinner. Her daughter-in-law was adjusting her youngest shirt. Alia hurried to her and embraced her grandmother's waist, almost dislodging the hat. You made it, she murmured. Naturally I did. Marlene responded. Do you imagine a seating error would prevent me? They laughed, lingering in the embrace. Alia retreated, her eyes glistening. I witnessed everything, Grandma. The videos, the letter. I'm receiving messages from students at school, professors, classmates, individuals I don't even know. You've instigated conversations. I didn't attempt to, Marlene stated. I simply didn't want to remain silent anymore. Alia concurred. Perhaps we don't always have to raise our voices. But when we do speak, people should pay attention. Later that afternoon, while gathering her belongings back at the hotel, Marlene received a formal letter slid under her door. It bore the Coastal Air logo in an embossed design. The letter contained an offer, an invitation to speak at their annual Equity and Training Summit, with all expenses covered. They described it as an opportunity to elevate the discussion. She read the letter twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in her purse. The next day, she called the number provided. Ms. Daniels, we're honored you returned our call, said a representative. We'd love for you to be our guest speaker. Your story, your grace, has moved thousands. I'm flattered, Marlene said plainly, but I won't be attending. The woman on the other end paused. May I ask why? Marlene responded, I wasn't moved to speak for your company. I spoke because my dignity fell out of place in row 19. She concluded the call softly and settled onto the bed's edge, observing a small group of children playing in the park across the street. The wind swirled leaves in lazy circles. She didn't require a public forum. She had already conveyed her message, and it was apparent without explicit statement. This time, the seat wasn't withheld from her. It was presented. She simply declined to occupy it. However, there was one final matter she needed to address. The information wasn't shared with the airline, nor with reporters. It was for all of us. The morning she flew back home, Marlene sat quietly by the airport window, observing the activity on the tarmac. Luggage carts, fuel trucks, a slow taxiing plane with its belly full of untold stories. She sipped coffee from paper cup, her hands now steady. The commotion had subsided. News cycles had moved on. Trending topics had displaced her face with fresh headlines. And that was acceptable. Marlene's actions weren't motivated by a desire for attention. They stemmed from an internal resistance to diminishing. Her phone vibrated again. It was another message from an unknown sender, a retired nurse in Arizona. The message read, I've spent my whole life apologizing before I even spoke. Thank you for reminding me I don't have to. Marlene reread the message, then put her phone away and surveyed the terminal. People passed by her, pulling carry-on bags, enjoying lattes, and holding onto their children's hands. Most didn't recognize her. She wore her usual gray sweater and pearl earrings, nothing extravagant. Yet, if one observed carefully, there was a certain quality to her demeanor, a quiet strength that surpassed mere physical bearing. She recalled the many years she had dedicated to assuring her students they mattered, instilling in young black girls the importance of carrying themselves with confidence, articulating their thoughts with precision, and refusing to allow others to diminish their worth. She believed she had concluded imparting this guidance upon her retirement. She was mistaken. Self-respect is inherent. It isn't acquired through achievement or dependent on positions, designations, or connections. It isn't bestowed by unfamiliar individuals, and it cannot be compromised when circumstances deem it problematic for another. It is rightfully yours, regardless of whether others acknowledge it. That was the core principle. It resonated not only with those who observed her movement down the plain aisle, but with the reserved individuals. Those who suppressed their dignity countless times in checkout lines, boardrooms, waiting rooms. Those who've been subtly indicated to relinquish their seat, either physically or figuratively, to someone deemed more significant. Marlene's story wasn't concerning revenge. It wasn't reflecting anger. It wasn't even focused on that man or that airline. The memory centered on the decision she made, resolving that she wouldn't remain silent for anyone. Just before her flight was scheduled to board, she rose and stretched. A young girl close by gently pulled on her mother's sleeve and murmured, "That's the lady from the video." Marlene offered a slight smile. It wasn't a broad smile, nor one seeking acknowledgement. It was the type of smile that conveyed, "I am aware of my identity." As she proceeded toward the gate, the same flight attendant from her initial journey appeared, though in a different uniform on a different day. The woman looked up, a flash of recognition in her eyes. She offered a brief nod. Marlene stated simply, "Good morning." Nothing more, nothing less. A lengthy explanation wasn't necessary. Applause wasn't required. She possessed something more valuable: serenity. As the gate opened and boarding commenced, Marlene didn't hurry. She waited patiently. She proceeded deliberately, and, upon reaching her row, yes, first class once more, she positioned her bag under the seat, took a seat, and gazed out the window. The sky stretched endlessly. She remained silent for the entire flight because she felt no need to speak. Occasionally, the most impactful declaration is simply holding your place, particularly when others anticipate you to relinquish it. Therefore, if you're hearing this and you've ever felt diminished for asserting yourself, recall Marlene Daniels. Not because she became widely known online, but because she never increased her volume, and yet everyone understood her. If this narrative resonated with you, please share it. Speak when you are able. Remain in your seat when required. And most importantly, never allow another person to determine when your dignity is present. Two men believed it was amusing to embarrass a mother in front of her children, until a mechanic, wearing a grease-stained shirt, quietly stopped them in front of everyone in the store. Roderick Blaine, 42, hadn't intended to be a hero that evening. He had just completed a long shift at the mechanic shop off Greenwell Springs Road in Baton Rouge. His work shirt still had a faint odor of oil and sweat, and his back felt sore in that familiar, persistent way it did when the weather suggested rain. He intended to quickly purchase a few items: milk, eggs, perhaps some smoked sausage, and return home before his niece completed her homework. She had been staying with him for several weeks while her mom worked the late shift at the hospital. They had established a regular pattern: dinner, cartoons, spelling drills. He didn't even use a card, opting for a handheld basket and a mental list. The store experienced a lack of congestion, yet a palpable sense of unease hung in the air. Shoppers with weary expressions, children complaining, a hurried individual quickly maneuvering past, someone proceeding at a leisurely pace. It was the sort of atmosphere where direct glances were avoided, and all desired a swift entry and exit. Roderick was in the process of his internal review and moving towards the frozen foods area. That's when he detected it, a voice distinct, piercing, rising above the subdued sounds of checkout scanners and squeaking cartwheels. A different voice then, laced with laughter. It wasn't a pleasant sound, the type that prompted a tightening of the jaw before understanding its cause. He turned, his attention drawn to the disturbance. Two men were positioned close to the freezer doors. They appear to be about his age, perhaps slightly younger. Both wore baseball caps. One had a Bluetooth earpiece, and the other displayed a tattoo extending up his neck. Their posture seemed relaxed, but their voices did not match. They weren't shouting, but they were acting. A young woman, likely in her early 30s, stood nearby. She was wearing a faded hoodie and attempting to manage two children, a toddler in the cart and a boy around 7 years old holding on. Her daughter was upset. Her son looked down at the floor. The woman held her Snap card tightly. Roderick initially struggled to understand every word the men spoke, but their tone conveyed their message. They said she should have waited for a man before having so many children. He thought she likely had a different partner for each child. The man with the earpiece quietly laughed, shaking his head as if the woman were a joke. Roderick halted. He stood there, 2 feet from the frozen peas, one hand still holding his basket. He observed the woman's shoulders become rigid, her jaw tighten. However, she didn't acknowledge them. She focused on her daughter, gently moving the cart back and forth as if it were a cradle. Silence filled the space. No one intervened. He looked around the aisle. The sound registered. A teenage cashier briefly looked up. An older woman close to the produce section stood motionless, feigning interest in a label. The moment lingered, as if everyone hoped it would simply disappear. It did not. Roderick advanced. He didn't move towards the woman, nor towards the man. Just forward. His heart began its familiar, heavy rhythm, the one that accompanies the confusion of anger and shame. He recognized this feeling. It wasn't precisely the moment, but it felt similar. Different people, a different location. Still, the core message remained. He observed as the young man gently pulled at his father's coat. "Father, may we simply leave?" He crouched down, murmured something into his ear. His voice was quiet, and his hands trembled slightly as he reached into his wallet. Silas paused. He wasn't one for conflict. Not since 1998. But something about that young man's tone. Something about the way he inquired, "Can we just go?" As if the disgrace was theirs, not the adult men. It evoked a feeling within. And suddenly, Roderick forgot about the milk and eggs. However, before he could speak, the man with the earpiece added something. A statement that halted Roderick again, this time for a completely different cause. The man with the earpiece remarked, audible to several shoppers in the aisle, that if she allocated less time to accessing food stamps and more to employment, perhaps she wouldn't require assistance. The delivery of his statement was significant. He spoke loudly, seemingly intending for the entire store to overhear. The impression was that he aimed to publicly shame her. Roderick's hand tightened around the basket, his knuckles turning pale. He remained positioned back, partially obscured by the end cap displaying canned soups. From his vantage point, he observed the woman's profile. Her cheekbones were prominent, her mouth set in a firm line. She refused to offer them the gratification of a reaction, yet her tension was palpable. Her son held her waist tightly, as if securing her position. The other man, identified by the neck tattoo, bumped his companion and scoffed, "Don't waste your breath. She's probably just going to sell that food to buy a new wig." Roderick blinked. He paused, thinking he might have misunderstood. But no, that was what he had said. Still, no one reacted. The teenage cashier averted her gaze. The woman examining the fruit labels now intently checked her phone. A young man pushing a cart filled with Gatorade steered clear of them, as if avoiding something he couldn't see. It felt as though everyone was attempting to vanish. The mother tried to remain composed. She didn't raise her voice, nor did she succumb to despair. She deliberately gave her card to the cashier, her gaze fixed on the small display as if her well-being hinged on it. The toddler had become still, aware of the strained atmosphere. Roderick released a deep breath through his nose. He was observing a woman being openly humiliated for needing assistance. A woman who, judging by her appearance, seemed to be simply attempting to manage the day with her children fed and her self-respect preserved. 2 adult men, appearing as though they'd avoided regular employment for some time, seemed intent on shaming her. The situation felt disturbingly recognizable. He recalled a childhood memory of standing in line with his mother around the age of 8 or 9, at a grocery store off Plank Road. He remembered the burning embarrassment of the stairs back then, the way people looked when his mom presented food stamps. She never discussed it openly. She simply told him, "Keep your head up and hold the bag, baby." The memory triggered something within him. He moved nearer, now fully visible. "Hey," he called out, the word carrying enough volume to draw the attention of both men. The individual with the earpiece lifted an eyebrow. The other offered a smirk. Roderick maintained a composed tone. "Evenly. You consistently address women in that manner. Or is it only when you presume no one will object?" The men paused, appearing uncertain whether he intended it as a jest. The man bearing the tattoo chuckled faintly. "What? Your boyfriend? Or something?" Roderick shook his head. "Nah, I'm just a man who understands the difference between a joke and bullying." That seemed to surprise them. The man with the earpiece struggled to speak. Roderick moved forward. He didn't act aggressively or threaten anyone, but he positioned himself close enough to no longer be a background voice. Close enough that people in the aisle were now paying attention. "You notice a woman with her kids. She isn't causing any trouble. She was simply attempting to purchase groceries. And you decided today was the opportune moment to display how insignificant you are?" The neck tattoo guy rolled his eyes. "Man, mind your own business." Roderick didn't blink. "This is my business. Anytime I see a grown man harass a mother in front of her children as if it were entertainment, yeah, that's my business." A silence descended. Not the kind that signifies resolution. The kind that suggests a change has occurred. The woman remained standing at the register. Her hands paused, as if uncertain whether to continue packing her bag or observe the situation. Her son looked up at Roderick, his eyes wide with confusion. Before either man could react, the manager arrived, and his initial words would drastically alter the room's atmosphere. The store manager's voice pierced the tension, crisp and concise, though somewhat delayed. "Is there a problem over here?" he inquired. He was a short man in his 50s. Heavy-framed glasses, a khaki shirt tucked into worn jeans. A name tag identified him as Vince Callahan, and his darting eyes revealed he's been observing from afar, intervening only as the volume increased. Roderick remained silent initially, wanting to ascertain the recipient of the question. The two men straightened slightly, seemingly realizing they may have overstepped. "It's nothing," the person with the tattoo stated, raising their hands in a gesture of innocence. "We were simply having a conversation," the other person added hastily. "No one made contact with her or anything." Roderick looked toward Vince, who returned his gaze, seemingly unsure of his position in the situation. "Talking?" Roderick inquired, his voice calm. "Is that what you consider talking?" Vince paused. "Look, I just want to avoid any problems in the store. Customers are trying to make purchases." Roderick inhaled deeply. "Were you prepared to allow these two men to harass a woman in front of her children rather than address the issue?" Vince reacted visibly to the statement. A silence fell, and everyone remained still. The mother continued to stand quietly, her hands now carefully arranging items into a single reusable grocery bag. She showed no tears. However, her expression held a detached quality, a type of emotional barrier people develop when they've learned to mask pain for an extended period. Roderick looked at her, then back at Vince. "This isn't about comfort, man. It's about right and wrong." The words weren't loud, but they carried. A woman a few feet away who had been picking out yogurt suddenly nodded and muttered, "He's right." Then someone else, an older man in a camouflage jacket, murmured, "Ain't no need to talk to a lady like that. Especially not with her babies standing there." The tide was turning. The two men sensed it. The guy with the earpiece shifted uncomfortably. He stated, his voice quieter, "We didn't intend any harm. Just some playful interaction." Roderick turned, shaking his head gently. "If causing distress to someone attempting to nourish her children is your idea of fun, a serious self-assessment is necessary." He spoke with clarity, avoiding raised voices or dramatic displays, simply stating facts. The tattooed man muttered something almost inaudible and began to leave. His companion followed suit. Vince made no attempt to detain them. Roderick did not pursue them either. His purpose wasn't to engage in a confrontation. It was to be witnessed asserting himself. Someone had done it, so that woman, her kids, and anyone else in the store would know. Vince remained behind, hands on his hips. "I'll speak with them if they return," he offered, his voice lacking conviction. Roderick didn't respond to him. He turned to the woman instead. "Are you all right?" She looked at him for the first time. Her voice was soft but clear. "Yes, thank you." The little boy peered out from behind his mother's hoodie, his eyes moving between her and Roderick. He remained silent, but he no longer seemed frightened. Roderick offered the kid a small smile. "You assisted your mother today. You performed well." The boy's lips moved slightly, as though he desired to return the smile, but hesitated. The mother then spoke. "People generally remain silent. They simply observe," Roderick confirmed. "Yes, I understand. I have been one of those individuals," he stated, meaning his words sincerely. He had remained quiet in different locations, different circumstances, not out of concurrence, but because it was simpler, unlike this time. Just as things seemed to be calming, the boy spoke, causing Roderick to hesitate more than any comment from the adults. Roderick was preparing to take his basket and allow them to proceed without interruption when the boy looked up and quietly asked, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" The unexpectedness and innocence of the question stopped Roderick in his tracks. The woman immediately turned, her eyes widening. "Baby, please don't say that." Roderick chuckled softly, not in derision, but in genuine surprise. He knelt down to be at the boy's eye level. "No, I'm not your bodyguard," he said, "but I noticed something that seemed amiss. And sometimes, when something is wrong, it's important to speak up." The boy appeared puzzled. "Even if it's not your mother," Roderick paused. "Particularly if it's not your mother." The mother retrieved her bag and reached for her son's hand. "Say thank you," she murmured, her voice remaining calm, but detached. "Thank you," the boy replied. His voice was softer now. Roderick rose, observing their preparations to depart. The toddler had fallen asleep against his sister's shoulder within the cart. The mother offered him a courteous nod, then refocused on her children and proceeded towards the door. Roderick remained standing for a moment longer, his basket dangling limply in his hand. His anger had subsided. He felt weary of encountering individuals who believed they could utter whatever they pleased to whomever, without repercussions. He was weary of seeing children learn those lessons without realizing it. He also felt frustrated by missed opportunities, moments that required the courage to speak up. He walked down the bread aisle, but suddenly everything felt wrong. He no longer felt like shopping. His appetite had disappeared near the frozen pizza. He drifted towards the self-checkout, considering he might just grab a drink, something cold, and leave. As he turned the corner, he saw them once more, the mother and her children, positioned by the vending machines close to the exit. She was searching her purse, likely looking for coins. Her son was sitting on the bench, softly rocking his sleeping sister. Roderick lessened his pace. A portion of him desired to continue walking. He believed he had already fulfilled his responsibility. However, something about her expression, it wasn't fear, it wasn't anger, it was weariness. The kind of weariness that doesn't dissipate with rest. The weariness that accumulates over years of being overlooked, criticized, and disregarded. He moved closer, deliberately. "Got enough for the machine?" he inquired. She looked up, visibly surprised. "Oh, I was just checking if I'd change," she explained, adding, "I told him he could choose a snack if he waited patiently." Roderick reached into his pocket and produced a few wrinkled dollar bills. "Let me assist," he offered. She paused. "I didn't request," she began, but he gently interrupted. "You didn't." "I'm offering," she finished. Her expression subtly hardened. It was pride. It mirrored the clothing his mother used to wear. It was the sort of person who prefers self-reliance, yet recognizes respectful assistance when it's provided. She nodded once, her movement now with less uncertainty. Her son selected a pack of cookies and a juice. Roderick inserted the payment and observed the machine's mechanical sounds as it dispensed the item, resembling a somewhat awkward expression of gratitude. "What's your name?" she asked. Roderick extended his hand. Tanya Wells." A tremor passed between them. A connection felt beyond a simple meeting. Her gaze settled on him, clear and unwavering, devoid of gratitude or obligation. Just even. No response was needed back there, she observed. I know, Roderick replied. But I didn't want your son to perceive that silence as typical, she confessed, pausing briefly before directing her attention to her boy, who was eagerly opening a package of cookies, as if it were Christmas. I hope he remembers your face, she said, and Roderick remained silent. He was at a loss for words. However, before he could leave, Tanya posed a question he hadn't anticipated, causing him to observe her and himself with a new perspective. "You got kids?" Tanya inquired. Roderick was taken aback by the question. It was delivered so casually, as if requesting directions. Yet, the underlying significance felt more substantial than the words suggested. He paused, then offered a slight shrug. "No, not mine anyway. My niece has been staying with me. Her mom works nights at the hospital." Tanya nodded, indicating she understood. "So you're the safe place for somebody?" Roderick hesitated. He hadn't previously considered that perspective. He wasn't intentionally trying to be a safe place for anyone. He was simply providing assistance, doing what was necessary. However, the way she phrased it caused a feeling of constriction in his chest. "Trying to be," he replied. They paused briefly in that unusual area situated between two vending machines and an automatic door, which repeatedly opened and closed as customers passed. The exterior air grew darker. The store's illumination made the location feel colder than it actually was. Tanya carefully removed her daughter from the cart, cradling her in one arm. The toddler shifted, appearing drowsy but making no noise. "You don't speak as if you're frightened," she stated. "I wasn't," Roderick responded. He didn't express a desire for a confrontation, she observed, receiving a slight smile in response. "I've experienced conflict before," he stated. "It hasn't altered much. Words did today." Roderick remained silent initially, because, honestly, he wasn't certain what the day had altered, if anything at all. The men departed as if everything were normal. Vince, the manager, offered little resistance. The majority of onlookers simply remained still and watched. However, her son had smiled, and Tanya was still present, standing tall. That surely had to signify something. At that moment, the automatic door opened once more, and the two men from before re-entered. Roderick's body stiffened immediately. Tanya's did too. She held her daughter closer. Her son slid off the bench and moved behind her, as if trying to disappear. However, the men didn't glance in their direction. They kept their gaze ahead, bypassed Roderick entirely, and proceeded toward the rear of the store. Perhaps they would return for beer, or perhaps they had simply forgotten something. They remained silent. They avoided eye contact. They didn't even acknowledge our presence. Roderick didn't pursue them. He didn't need to. Tanya released a long, deep breath. "I anticipated an attempt." "They will not," Roderick stated calmly. "Not tonight." A few feet away, the teenage cashier, the same one who had averted her gaze previously, was now maneuvering a small cart of returns toward the register. She halted as she passed Roderick. "I observed what you did," she said quietly. Roderick turned to her. She looked over at Tanya and her children. "I regret not saying anything," she thought. Roderick nodded thoughtfully. "You will next time." The girl offered a slight, almost self-conscious smile and departed. She made no attempt to turn back. Tanya looked down at her son. "Come on, dear." He clasped her hand, holding tightly onto the cookie pack. Roderick observed them as they walked towards the parking lot, the little girl now fully awake and rubbing her eyes against her mother's shoulder. Tanya glanced back once, their eyes connecting briefly. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't a farewell. Simply a silent recognition, genuine and sufficient. He turned to depart, retrieving his overlooked basket, stepping back to do so. Yet, something felt altered. The eggs could wait. So too could the milk. As he walked out into the night, a personal realization sparked within him, a feeling connected to his past that he hadn't considered in years, triggering a memory with unexpected force. Roderick did not go home immediately. He remained in his truck in the parking lot, with the window rolled halfway down, allowing the warm Baton Rouge air to flow in as the sky transitioned from gray to black. The grocery store lights hummed behind him, fluorescent and seemingly without end, stretching long shadows across the parking lot. He gazed forward for a considerable time, his hands resting on the steering wheel, the engine off, not because he anticipated something, simply thinking, dwelling on a weighty feeling. That boy's question, "Are you my mom's bodyguard?" repeated in his mind, and the way Tanya had said, "You're the safe place for somebody." He hadn't anticipated either of those sentiments to linger, but they had. The recollection that surfaced wasn't dramatic or overwhelming. It was subtle and understated. Perhaps that's why it affected him so deeply. He was 10, waiting in line with his mother at a corner store just outside Port Allen. It was summer, and his shoes were 2 sizes too small. His mother had been working 3 part-time jobs since his dad left. On that day, her EBT card malfunctioned. The cashier, a man with a slicked-back mullet, told her to move aside. Publicly. Next, the man announced, "This woman can't pay." Roderick recalled hearing sighs and shuffles from the people trailing behind them. Someone even chuckled. His mother didn't shed any tears. She simply stood, attempting to understand where things had gone amiss. Her hands had shaken as she entered the numbers on the keypad. Her gaze remained fixed on the screen, as though intense focus might somehow resolve the issue. A man in a gray work shirt, a stranger standing behind them, moved forward and paid. He did so silently, without a word or explanation, simply sliding a 20 across the counter as if it were inconsequential. Roderick also remembered the man's boots. They were scuffed. The clothes were soiled, as if he'd worn them for years. His mother expressed her gratitude 3 times. The man simply replied, "It's all right," and departed. Roderick never forgot that. Not because of the money, but because for one moment someone chose to prevent his mom from feeling insignificant. And now, all these years later, he'd unknowingly become that man. He leaned back in his seat and rubbed his hands over his face. "Safe place for somebody," he muttered, half to himself. He hadn't always gotten it right. There had been moments he remained silent when he ought to have spoken. Instances where he averted his gaze. But tonight he did not, and that felt significant, not a resolution, but a beginning. He reached into the glove compartment and retrieved the small notebook where he recorded grocery lists and budget details. He turned to the rear, located a vacant page, and penned 3 words. Speak. Stand. Stay. He wasn't certain why he wrote them that way, but it felt correct. Like a prompting, like a key. A collection of teenagers in hoodies walked by his truck, laughing and jostling each other, having just left the store with Slurpees and bags of chips. One of them made eye contact and offered a brief nod of recognition. It wasn't elaborate, just a quick movement of the chin. Roderick returned the gesture subtly. He started the engine. The radio began playing softly, featuring an old Otis Redding song. He allowed it to play for a minute before lowering the volume. As he continued his journey, he observed a city bus stop where a mother and her daughter waited, illuminated by the weak light of a street lamp. The young girl rested against her mom's shoulder, seemingly dozing. Roderick reduced his speed as he rounded the bend. That scene also resonated with him. He thought of so many mothers in this area, striving to manage everything, holding on with worn-out resources, and bearing the burden of groceries, children, and societal expectations as if it were simply an obligation. Sadly, they often go unnoticed. He drove into his driveway, turned off the truck, and paused for a moment. But prior to entering the house, he reviewed the notebook one last time, making a silent vow that would resonate well into the future. Roderick stood on his porch beneath a wavering light bulb. The screen door groaned as he opened it. Inside, the modest house held the scent of aged timber and laundry detergent. Lainey was curled up on the couch under a blanket, a textbook resting on her knees, and a pencil in her mouth. She looked up as he entered. "You're gone forever," she said. He dropped his keys onto the side table. "Yeah, I ran into something unexpected." "Like what?" Roderick hesitated. She asked it so casually, unaware that her uncle had just been standing between a mother and 2 grown men poised to overwhelm her regarding a shopping trip. How would you explain that to a 12-year-old so it doesn't feel overwhelming? "I witnessed someone being treated unfairly." I said something. Lainey looked at him. "Did you argue with him?" He chuckled, sounding weary. No, it wasn't necessary. Did it make a difference? He nodded. It did. Lainey returned to her book, as if that was a sufficient explanation, but Roderick remained standing. He found himself repeatedly recalling Tanya's expression, or her son's inquiry, or the realization that for a brief period that grocery store had served as a learning experience, not only for a frightened little boy or a weary young mother, but for all those within hearing distance, and for him. Roderick had previously believed that demonstrating courage meant confronting situations directly and forcefully, that unless it involved a significant display, it was inconsequential. However, tonight brought a shift in perspective. As his actions were met with silence rather than recognition, they did not become a popular topic. No phones were used. There were no news reports, no widely shared videos. Just a mother, a child, and a man who chose to act instead of remaining silent. Perhaps that's what the world needs, discrete actions that have a subtle impact. Ordinary individuals who recognize an injustice and voice their concerns, prioritizing integrity over apathy. He entered the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water. His hands remained stiff. He didn't notice until he placed the cup on the counter. Lainey's lunchbox sat on the counter. He opened it, almost automatically, to see if she's left anything behind. Inside, he found a half-eaten apple and a note he's written her earlier that morning. You got this. I'm proud of you. He paused, looking at it. 4 short words on a sticky note. And she's kept it. That affected him more than he anticipated, because it reminded him that words don't need to be forceful to resonate. They don't have to be flawless to be significant. He returned to the living room, settled beside Lainey, and observed the math homework she was finding difficult. Do you need some help? She offered, silently passing him a pencil. While they solved the problems together, he looked at her. This small, brilliant, stubborn girl, unaware of how frequently the world would challenge her and how vital it would be to advocate for those unable to do so themselves. He wished she would retain this memory of him. He wanted her to recognize someone who championed another person, unrelated and undeserving of such action, yet still in need of protection. That's the essence of strength he hoped she'd see. After finishing the final problem, Lainey looked up and said, You're like one of the good guys, huh? Roderick smiled. A genuine smile this time. He tried to convey. She nodded, seeming pleased. Good. A silence fell between them. The television hummed softly in the background. A dog barked once from somewhere beyond, then fell silent. Roderick relaxed against the couch, allowing the stillness to descend. He wasn't obligated to act as a bodyguard. He simply needed to demonstrate that he cared. And for this evening, that was sufficient. Should you ever witness someone facing unjust treatment and feel compelled to intervene, honor that impulse. Offer a word. Take action. Even minor deeds hold significance. They instruct. They safeguard. They are important. If this narrative resonated with you, even slightly, please share it. Perhaps someone else needs to read this today. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Real stories like this deserve to be shared. 2 teenagers walked into a car dealership with nothing but excitement and respect. Minutes later, they were asked to leave due to appearing suspicious. The following day, their billionaire father arrived, not to express anger, but to ensure the incident was publicly acknowledged. The sun was heavy over Tempe that afternoon, one of those dry, slow-moving Arizona days where the heat hums through the concrete. After track practice, Malik Townsend walked alongside his sister Ayanna through the parking lot of Madison Auto Gallery, his gray t-shirt damp against his back. They weren't intending to cause any disturbance. Malik, in fact, had been discussing this visit all week. I'm not saying I'm getting a car today, he said, adjusting the strap of his gym bag. But I want to see what they have. Maybe something used, you know? Ayanna laughed, tossing her braids over her shoulder just to gauge expectations before her birthday. You really think Dad is going to let you drive yourself to school in a 2-door coupe? Come on, he smiled. But his steps didn't slow. Let me dream. The dealership lot was still. Sleek silver sedans were arranged under sun-faded flags. The glass doors reflected the heat, and the two entered as any pair of kids with questions and wide eyes. The air conditioning inside was sharp, a contrast to the warmth outside. A middle-aged man wearing a pale blue dress shirt looked up from behind a counter. His gaze first fell on Malik, then moved to Ayanna. They were neatly dressed, Malik in athletic gear, Ayanna in a simple dress and sneakers. Their appearance was unassuming, quiet. Nevertheless, the man rose quickly. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice concise. Malik, always courteous, approached. "Yeah, just checking out some cars. Maybe looking for something used?" "My birthday is next month, and do you have an appointment?" A man interrupted, already walking toward them. Malik hesitated. "No, we do not allow unsupervised minors in the showroom." He cut in, glancing quickly at a coworker across the room. "Company policy." Ayanna's face shifted. "We're not touching anything." "Still, this is not a hangout spot." His tone had turned colder now. "You can look at the website if you're interested." The silence that followed was thick. Malik started to speak, then stopped. Ayanna's fingers gripped the bag strap with force. "We'll leave," Malik said softly. They departed as such. There was no shouting, no resistance. Only the measured walk back along the sidewalk, with Ayanna holding her breath throughout. She remained silent until they were settled in the back of the Uber before she spoke. "That man regarded us as if we were insignificant." Malik acknowledged with a single, almost imperceptible nod. His jaw tightened. He touched his phone screen, verifying the ride time, and then gazed out the window. Ayanna observed her brother's reflection in the glass. She noticed how withdrawn he had become. He wasn't typically a boisterous person, but this felt different. It wasn't simply quietness, it was control. She remembered seeing that expression on their dad's face once before. "You're not going to tell Dad, are you?" He hesitated before replying. "Malik? I don't know," he finally said. "I don't even know what to call it." It's not like the man had said anything outlandish. He simply didn't want us present. Ayanna reclined. "It seemed unbelievable to me." Neither of them spoke for the remainder of the journey. It wasn't necessary. They were both aware of what had transpired. However, the man at the dealership was completely unaware of who he had just dismissed, and by the following morning, he would discover it. The Uber proceeded through the hills of Paradise Valley, where the houses grew larger, quieter, and more dispersed as they ascended. Ayanna sat with her arms crossed inside the black SUV, the tinted windows shielding her simmering frustration. Malik remained silent, holding his phone with the screen dark. His thoughts drifted away. Their home appeared, a contemporary white and stone house situated behind a private gate. It wasn't ostentatious, but possessed an expensive quality typical of established wealth or astute financial acumen. Their father, Charles Townsend, had constructed his technology company from the ground up, initially offering hardware repairs and Flagstaff before achieving success with a data security startup. Currently, his name appeared in Forbes articles and at Silicon Valley panel discussions. However, locally, he was simply known as Charles. The children entered through the side entrance and placed their belongings on the bench close to the kitchen. The house carried a subtle scent of cedar and fresh linen. Their housekeeper, Mrs. K, looked up from the dining table while folding towels. "Hey everyone, is everything all right?" Ayanna mumbled in response. Malik did not answer. Their father's voice came from down the hall. "Malik?" Malik appeared in the hallway moments later, still wearing his navy polo, barefoot, and holding tablet. "You're back early," he said, giving a shrug. Charles noticed a slump in his son's shoulders immediately, and the way he avoided eye contact. He glanced at Ayanna. Her expression conveyed more than she likely intended. What occurred? Malik remained silent. Charles placed the tablet down and crossed his arms. "Malik," Ayanna exhaled. "A man at the dealership stated we were not permitted inside." Charles furrowed his brow. "Which dealership?" "Madison Auto Gallery, located off University Drive." "What precisely did he say?" Malik massaged the back of his neck. "He indicated we weren't allowed to browse. He mentioned they don't allow individuals under the age of 18 without a parent present and accused us of loitering." Charles remained motionless for a considerable time. His eyes narrowed a little, not in anger, but with concentration. That measured, careful assessment that indicated he was anticipating 2 or 3 moves ahead. "What did you do?" "We left," Malik stated. "We didn't want to create a disturbance." That was impactful. Charles inhaled deeply, moved into the kitchen, and poured a glass of water. He offered it to Malik before speaking again. "You acted correctly. Do you understand?" Malik affirmed once. Then, his father settled onto a counter stool and looked squarely at him. "Please understand this. You are not inferior to anyone. I'm not concerned if you arrive in athletic wear or formal attire. Maintain your composure. And if someone perceives you as a cause for concern, that is their responsibility, not yours." Ayanna rested against the fridge, observing. Charles continued, his voice calm and measured. "However, you also need to be aware of this. Quietude does not invariably signify strength. Occasionally, allowing minor offenses to occur enables their repetition, first with one individual and then with another." Malik's throat tightened. "What's the plan?" Charles didn't respond immediately. He surveyed them both, then rose and retrieved his phone. "I'm going to speak with someone," Ayanna said, surprised. "With whom?" Charles replied, departing the room. The subsequent hours until tomorrow morning unfolded with an unusual calm. There were no shouts, no hurried phone calls. Charles prepared dinner as always, grilled salmon, asparagus, and rice. They ate together as a family. A change was palpable. It wasn't animosity, it was determination. That night, Malik lay awake, gazing at the ceiling for a considerable time before finally falling asleep. He didn't fully understand what his dad intended with the discussion, but he sensed it would be more impactful than any outburst. Meanwhile, at the dealership, the manager remained unaware that trouble was brewing. Madison Auto Gallery commenced business at 9 a.m. promptly. As early as 8:45, employees began arriving, their keys jingling, coffee cups in hand, and sunglasses still on. The typical Monday routine. Derek Holton, the assistant sales manager, rested against the front desk, sipping his iced Americano and checking his phone. He no longer recognized many of the names of his inbox. Employee turnover was significant. The position offered good compensation for those who could sell, and he was a skilled salesperson. By 9:03, there was one customer in the parking lot. A navy blue Rolls-Royce Phantom shimmered in the Arizona sun. It did not enter a standard parking spot. It did not wait in the rear. It moved smoothly to the front doors and stopped. Initially, no one exited the vehicle. Derek looked at the receptionist, then walked around the desk. "Are you expecting someone?" he inquired. She replied, her gaze fixed on the car, "No." Then, the door opened. A tall man emerged, wearing a dark blazer, sharply tailored slacks, and shoes polished to a mirror shine. He moved deliberately, with composure. Without preamble, he pushed the glass door open and paused at the entrance. "Good morning," he stated, his voice smooth yet resolute. "I'm seeking a manager." Derek hesitated. "I'm the assistant manager. How may I assist you?" The man fixed him with a direct gaze. "You're not the person I require." At that moment, Kyle Linson, the general manager, emerged from the adjacent office. He was tall, red-faced, and perpetually seemed stressed. "Morning," he said quickly. "I'm Kyle. What can I do for you?" The man retrieved a card from his jacket pocket and offered it. Kyle read the name deliberately. Charles Townsend, founder and chairman. TNS Global. He looked up, a flush rising on his face. Wow, sir. I wasn't expecting," he stammered. "I imagine you weren't either," Charles replied, stepping further inside. "I won't take much of your time." Kyle indicated his office, his eyes briefly darting towards Derek. We could talk in here." But Charles remained still. "No need for privacy. This is a public place." "I'll speak briefly." Kyle nodded, appearing uncomfortable. "Naturally. Please proceed." Charles surveyed the showroom. "Yesterday, 2 children entered. One was my son, the other my daughter." Kyle blinked. His throat moved. "I understand. They were informed they couldn't browse, that they should depart, that this establishment wasn't suitable for them." "Sir, we have—" Charles raised a hand. "I'm not here to debate. I'm not seeking a reimbursement. I experienced no loss yesterday, but you did. You missed an opportunity to act justly towards 2 young people, individuals raised to show respect for others, regardless of how they are treated in return. Several other employees had begun to move nearer, feigning to organize documents or wipe down surfaces. Charles continued, My children are not disruptive. They are thoughtful, intelligent, raised with care, and they don't require your approval. However, they deserve to be regarded as people, not as dangers. Derek looked down at his shoes. The receptionist had ceased typing. Kyle cleared his throat. "Mr. Townsend, if I may, I'm not requesting an apology," Charles stated. Apologies are simple. The crucial aspect is what one believes when no one is observing. The choices one makes when they presume no one will question them. He paused, allowing the silence to linger. Because next time it won't be my children. It could be someone who lacks a father with connections to the media. They will leave this place with a memory that will likely remain unspoken, yet it will stay with them for the remainder of their lives. Then he turned to depart. But just before opening the door, he added, without looking back, "You can sell luxury without being small." I hope you understand how. Outside, a small gathering had formed. Two individuals were recording on their phones, one local reporter acting on a tip, and a woman holding a microphone. Charles had not alerted them. The news had simply spread. A change permeated the air, not in temperature, but in feeling. Charles descended onto the dealership pavement with calm, measured steps. His expression remained steady despite the small group gathering. Two college students from a local school stood apart, their phones out, quietly speaking to one another. A reporter from KXME5 News was already in the process of speaking, murmuring in her microphone, uncertain if she was broadcasting live. Charles did not raise his voice. He did not seek out a podium. He paused close to the entrance, straightened his jacket, and began to speak. "I hadn't intended to offer any words today. However, I understand the nature of things. If I remain silent now, another will attempt to voice my thoughts." He raised his gaze, observing the limited faces present. "My son, Malik, and my daughter, Ayana, arrived here yesterday afternoon. They were quiet. They didn't disturb anything. They came here to observe. Like any other young person with a flicker of anticipation and a hope in their heart, his voice remained steady. It wasn't booming, it was gentle. So gentle, it compelled people to draw closer. Yet they were asked to depart. Not for violating a regulation, not for handling something inappropriately, but because someone determined they didn't fit, that they presented an issue before they uttered a single word. The college student clutching the phone released a quiet, trembling sigh. Charles continued, "I've worked my whole life to build something that would last. And I've taught my children that what you build doesn't just sit in your bank account. It lives in how you treat people, in the everyday decisions, the ones you make when nobody's watching." He paused again, not for drama, but because the next words meant something. "Yesterday, someone looked at my children and didn't see who they were. They saw who they assumed they were, and they dismissed them. It's possible to be disrespectful without raising your voice. Sometimes it's about making someone feel diminished in a place they were eager to enter." Behind the glass doors, Kyle stood watching, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Charles glanced over his shoulder briefly, then returned his attention to the people ahead of him. "I'm not suggesting anyone should boycott this establishment. I don't endorse that approach. I'm no longer even feeling anger. I am simply weary of observing this recurring behavior. It's deeply troubling to see young people treated as if they've committed crimes before any wrongdoing has occurred. Such experiences leave a lasting impact. Silence allows these situations to persist." Several more people paused on the sidewalk. A delivery person across the street adjusted their sunglasses to observe more closely. "I came today because my children should not have been subjected to that kind of treatment, and because I want them to understand that when something is wrong, it shouldn't be ignored. You confront it with clarity, with dignity, and without allowing it to change who you are." He retreated towards a Rolls-Royce, his hand resting on the door handle. "One more point. My kids left yesterday, holding their heads high. That speaks volumes about their character and reveals nothing about the person who attempted to diminish them." He entered the car and remained silent. The onlookers did not offer applause. There was no clapping. A stunned silence filled the space as everyone absorbed the information, the visuals, and the implications. Inside the dealership, Derek lowered himself into a chair. The receptionist's eyes were brimming with tears, and she couldn't explain why. Collinson stayed near the window, his arms held rigidly at his sides. Yet, he understood that it was no longer possible to manage the narrative. By that afternoon, the first video appeared on Twitter, followed by Instagram, and then the news. The story began to develop independently. By lunchtime, the story had moved beyond local coverage. A shaky vertical phone video, initially recorded by college freshman Tori Clements, had already garnered over 2 million views on X. The accompanying caption stated, "This man just entered a dealership that disrespected his kids and addressed the situation with remarkable composure. I'm truly speechless." Viewers weren't simply sharing the video, they were analyzing it, pausing specific moments, magnifying details, and engaging in discussions and debates within comment threads. A woman from Flagstaff shared a story, noting that Charles Townsend repaired her father's laptop in 2001 and refused payment. She described him as having always been exceptional. However, other reactions were less charitable. One anonymous user, whose profile picture featured an eagle, questioned why the children hadn't disclosed their father's identity, suggesting a desire to portray themselves as victims, which led to the situation escalating. The story subsequently appeared on morning talk shows. During a segment titled, "Billionaire Father Calls Out Discrimination at Tempe Car Dealership," Good Morning Phoenix reported that the dealership's Yelp rating plummeted from 4.2 to 2.1 within hours. Numerous one-star reviews appeared quickly. Customers cited concerns like rude and dismissive staff, feeling that a teenage son was treated like a criminal and vows to never return. Some reviewers claimed that unless one is wearing a suit and tie, they would be asked to leave before speaking. Naturally, the negative response wasn't solely from unfamiliar reviewers. Community organizations also started focusing attention on the situation, advocating for discussions regarding young people, societal views, and implicit prejudice. Amidst this, the dealership issued a response. This was a brief, 2-paragraph apology published on their website and Instagram page, stating, "We regret the recent experience that took place at our showroom and are actively reviewing our policies. We strive to provide a welcoming environment to all guests and take these matters seriously." The reactions online spoke volumes. The regret appears to stem from exposure rather than genuine remorse. Instead of policy review, perhaps employee evaluation is needed. This apology lacks sincerity, resembling a fine instead of an expression of concern. Privately, Collinson was working to manage the situation. He had already contacted 2 PR consultants, both of whom advised him to minimize communication, avoid public attention, and refrain from attempts at damage control. However, online sentiment disregarded PR strategies. The public demanded openness, accountability, and concrete steps. While Malik and Ayanna remained at home, their phones buzzed incessantly with messages, some from friends and others from unknown numbers. Ayanna showed her brother a message that elicited laughter, even amidst the circumstances. "Girl, is that your dad on the news? Tell him to run for office or something. I'm dead." However, more difficult messages soon followed. "Why didn't y'all just walk away?" One read, "Ain't nobody owes you a car." Another stated, "Not everything is about race." A final message simply asked, "He probably thought you were skipping school. So what? Rich people want sympathy now?" Malik glanced at his screen, his jaw clenched. Ayanna touched his shoulder. "Don't read that," he mumbled, not looking up. He continued scrolling. Their father entered the room, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "Put the phone down," Charles said. "Just for now." Malik paused, then placed his phone face down on the table. Ayanna did the same. Charles sat opposite them, leaning forward a little. Ayanna frowned. "You two didn't ask for this, but sometimes life decides your story's bigger than just you." "But we didn't even do anything," she added. "We just walked in." "I know," he replied. "That's what makes this so real. You did everything right. And still, someone saw you wrong." Malik stared at the tabletop. "Is it always going to be like that?" Charles paused, letting the question linger. "No," he said, "but you'll face it again. And when you do, you decide who you want to be in that moment." Reporters continued to gather outside. Inside, a feeling deeper than anger began to develop: awareness. and awareness is a persistent force. As the sun descended behind Camelback Mountain, it stretched shadows across the towns and backyard. It had been 2 days since Charles spoke at the dealership, 2 extended, peaceful days filled with news coverage, messages, and public commentary. Yet, shielded by the hedges, a sense of calm prevailed. Charles stood by the grill, methodically flipping salmon fillets. Malik was seated at the patio table, his elbows on his knees, gazing out across the lawn. Ayanna was leaning against the railing, her face hidden within her hoodie. There were no cameras, no inquiries, just family. You know, Charles began, without looking up when I was 16, I saved for 2 years to purchase my first car, a 1994 Corolla. It was faded red and had manual windows. Ayanna looked at him. You mentioned it didn't have AC, correct? Charles chuckled. None at all. A Phoenix summer nearly cooked me. But I cherished that car. I received that treatment not because of kindness, but because I deserved it. Malik finally glanced in my direction. Have you ever experienced something like that? Like we did? Charles acknowledged with a single nod. More times than I can recall. Being followed when entering stores. Being ridiculed when applying for bank loans. I was once refused service at a diner in Tucson. I was there with my code books in my lap, and I simply departed without a confrontation. But why didn't I respond? Malik inquired, mirroring my current reaction. Charles then turned another fillet. I didn't believe my voice held weight previously. I felt that remaining unnoticed was the sole path to progress. He paused, but I was mistaken. The grill emitted a quiet hiss. The truth is, son, enduring enough disrespect can lead you to forget what it feels like to be acknowledged. And I never desired that for you, nor for your sister. Ayanna took a seat next to her brother. You certainly ensured we were noticed. Charles now addressed them both. Being noticed isn't sufficient. One must be prepared for the consequences. The acclaim, the disapproval, the individuals who will support you for taking a stand, and those who will oppose it. Malik glanced at his hands. I never intended for it to become an issue. I simply wished to observe a car. I understand, Charles stated. That's what makes it significant. You weren't seeking attention. You were simply living your life. And someone objected to the appearance of that. They paused briefly. I am proud of you, Charles added. Both of you. Ayanna shrugged. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't attempt to demonstrate anything. You simply remained genuine, she said. It didn't seem courageous. It shouldn't, he responded. Courage is often understated. It's about not compromising your integrity in a world that occasionally lacks it. A quiet stillness enveloped the yard. Then Ayanna smiled. So, are we still searching for a car or what? Charles grinned. I anticipated you would inquire. Malik straightened up. Are you serious? Charles threw a set of keys onto the table. They fell near Malik's hand with a quiet clink. Check the garage tomorrow, he said. But it's not about the car. It's about who you become while driving it. That matters more than anything with an engine. Ayanna leaned into her brother, teasing. You better not crash it on the first day. Please, Malik shot back. I'm driving like it's made of glass. Charles laughed, and for the first time in days, the weight of the moment began to ease. Some stories conclude with anger, others with quietness. But this one concludes with a lesson. Sometimes the most effective way to respond is to remain upright, peaceful, truthful, and acknowledged. If this story evoked a feeling in you, share it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that challenge, connect, and remind us who we truly are.